The president wants to spy on 200 million Americans without a warrant. Has he read this document which he was sworn to uphold?
Now, I will not have you libel Abraham Lincoln.
I don't understand the problem with registering guns. We register cars.
Mark Levine brings you the news the government doesn't want you to know.
Today, an explosive story about connections between white supremacists and Islamic terrorists.
When there's a conflict between Scalia's conservative values and the Constitution of the United States, he throws away the Constitution.
When we do have secret prisons, that is not what America's all about.
Let's go to Mark in 5, 4, 3, 2.
Hello, America. Welcome to the Inside Scoop. By now, you probably know that President Bush has made a trip to Iraq and to Afghanistan. And if you haven't seen it already, you've probably seen the video that I'm about to play. This is President Bush getting a shoe thrown at him by a reporter in Iraq. I think in many ways this will be remembered perhaps as his legacy and a kind of a good metaphor for the Bush's Iraq policy. But as much as the Iraqi reporter was angry and throwing a shoe at Bush, I've got to say, compared to the way the congressional Republicans are acting, I would say Bush and Cheney were downright statesmen. I'm talking, of course, of what happened just Friday when the Democrats and a few well-meaning Republicans tried to protect the economy by saving the largest manufacturing plants in the United States. I'm talking, of course, about the big three automakers, particularly General Motors and Chrysler. At the last minute, the Republicans decided to filibuster the deal. Yes, a majority of senators were for it. And yes, in the new Congress, there are more than enough senators to pass this. But the Republicans decided this was their chance to stick it to the unions. Tennessee Senator Bob Corker particularly decided he was going to get the unions. He was going to wipe them off the face of America here, and he tried his best. He did not succeed. It looks like even though George Bush had said for a long time that he was not going to take money out of the Troubled Assets Recovery Program to pay to help with General Motors and Chrysler with the bridge loan, he changed his mind, so it's going to happen. And even though Dick Cheney, and you know, when I agree with Dick Cheney, it's a very rare event. Dick Cheney went to the Republicans and said this will be a Herbert Hoover-like event. Not you're going to ruin the economy. That wasn't enough to convince the Republicans. But you will be remembered for destroying the economy. That he thought would convince them. But apparently it didn't. And they went out to get the unions again. Now, my guest, Mike Lane, a Republican strategist, will probably have a different view on these topics. And that's why I invite him here, because I appreciate the debate and I appreciate having other points of view. Mike Lane, welcome again to the Inside Scoop.
Mark, thank you for having me back. Pleasure to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. I've got to say, when Bush and Cheney are acting like statesmen compared to your party, you know, that's an extreme event. It wasn't obviously throwing a shoe at the president is one thing in Iraq. But in this case, it seems like the Republican Party is throwing a shoe at American workers. They want to take down their unions. What's that about?
Well, the president, I think, showed some tremendous agility there in Iraq, and he's showing even more agility here at home on domestic policy. And you won't be surprised, and I hope our guests will appreciate the fact that I think the president's got this one dead wrong, and that the Senate Republicans were right to vote against the bailout of the failed Detroit auto companies.
The bridge loan. I mean, the money, it's a loan.
It's corporate welfare, Mark, is what it is. And Republicans, if they ever stand for anything, it's against corporate welfare. We've seen enough corporate welfare. It's time to end it. It's time to let companies and labor work together to sink or swim on their own. If they choose not to work together to sink and swim on their own, then, you know, I don't see where it's a compelling interest of the United States or of my particular tax dollar to bail out poorly managed companies.
Okay, lots of things to say here. One, as you know, back in the 70s, the government gave a loan to Chrysler.
Big mistake.
Chrysler paid back that loan.
Big mistake.
And the government made money. And Chrysler survived at least another 20, 30 years. But what's interesting to me about this whole package is that the Republicans that voted against it, and I should say the filibuster, because the majority of senators voted for it, the Republicans that filibustered this weren't arguing that there shouldn't be corporate welfare. They weren't making the argument you were. Bob Corker was more than willing to give corporate welfare. The main thing he wanted to do was harm the unions, harm the workers, and particularly retired workers. So those that had already earned their pension, he wanted to take their pensions away. What is the goal of that?
Well, as I understand what Corker was doing was he was saying, okay, you will get the votes of the Republicans, and these are in private negotiations with the UAW, because they had gotten the White House together, they had gotten the Senate Democrats together, they'd actually gotten the bill through the House with no Republican support because the Democrats will not work with the Republicans. Yeah, okay.
There were about 26 Republicans, just for the record.
Right.
They did vote for the bill. That's hardly none.
From Michigan, Indiana, and Ohio.
Right.
Okay, I rest my case.
They understood the need for the
they understood that their constituents would vote them out if they didn't get the welfare. So they're willing to trash the economy and not give them the welfare.
The loan. You call it welfare. Welfare doesn't have to be paid back. A loan does have to be paid back.
It's welfare, Mark. Come on. This is corporate welfare at its worst. Where is it written in the Constitution that the government either lends money to private corporations that have failed, or that they take an equity stake in corporations the way they're doing with this entire financial/auto/Detroit bailout? The government should not be owning the assets of production and wealth creation in the United States. The government should be creating rules of competition and stepping back and letting companies compete and succeed or fail on their own.
Okay, so Bob Corker and some 10 other Republicans that filibustered this $15 billion bridge loan to the automakers. Bob Corker and the others approved a $700 billion plan to bail out the financial industry. This was not a loan.
Okay.
This was a bailout, and it was, let me see, 50 times larger than the loan to the auto companies. They're hypocrites, aren't they?
The difference between that and this one, and it's not a subtle difference, it's a huge difference, and it's not actually being applied the way the TARP funds or the Troubled Assets Recovery Fund was first envisioned. It was supposed to be something that would maintain the survival and continued operation of the financial markets, not something that would bail out any particular company. The Treasury Secretary has misused the funds the way they were supposed to be applied. He's giving this money with no strings attached to financial institutions, which are not turning around and putting it back into the economy by creating loans. They're sitting there and hanging on to it and buying each other up in hopes of surviving another day. The Secretary of the Treasury is like clueless as to what he's doing. The Bush administration made a mistake in pushing this the way they did, and the Congress made a huge mistake in giving $700 billion to the administration without some sort of strings attached that would require that this money actually be used to benefit the economy rather than to buttress the bottom line of these corporation and fat cats that don't need it.
Mike Lane, I'm smiling because I don't know if you saw 60 Minutes last night.
I did not.
You did not. They did a show on Barney Frank.
Oh, you know what? Let me tell the audience something.
Did you see that?
You know what? I saw Barney Frank coming on and I turned it off. I just was not interested.
You missed a really good portrayal.
Barney Frank is the guy who caused all this.
Mike,
Him and Kristad caused this, and I'm going to sit there and watch 60 Minutes do a puff piece on Barney Frank?
The reason I'm smiling, Mike, is because your criticisms match his. You agree with Barney Frank. I want this to be remembered.
Even a broken clock is right twice a day. Barney does have his moments.
Barney Frank said, as you've said, that Hank Paulson misused the funds, that he did it with no strings attached, that we needed more strings, that he was looking too much out for the fat cats in the financial industry, and he wasn't required.
I don't think he was looking out for the fat cats.
They were his friends.
I think they're tangential beneficiaries of his stupidity. I don't think he was trying to help them. I think they're just, they're riding the wave of his stupidity.
You and Barney Frank agree that the funds were misused, but I take it you still think that the proposal, had we had a decent Treasury Secretary that knew how to use the funds properly, you still support the proposal, right? As John McCain did and Corker did and these other Republicans?
There was a need to maintain the financial markets in operation rather than letting them collapse. Yes, there's a difference in my mind between saving a marketplace and saving a company. I hate it, but I understood the need to save the markets, the financial markets, but I never understand the need to save any particular company.
Well, let's do the comparison here. We have $700 billion versus $15 billion. $15 billion.
Well, actually, we're talking about $40 billion now is what the administration says they're going to give the auto companies.
So they're actually getting more. Well, so now I want you to think about that. The proposal that died on Friday
was $15 billion.
Was for, I think it was $14.4 billion. It was actually slightly less than $15 billion.
It was enough to get them through to the next Congress.
It was enough to get them through the next Congress.
Right.
That's exactly right. It was a bridge loan. Rather than buying up these troubled assets, these incredible gambling side bets, credit derivative swaps, it was a loan rather than sheer gift, sheer welfare.
Where does the government get the authority to loan money to companies? I don't get that.
Where does it get the authority to do the whole $700 billion TARP program? I mean, if you can argue one's unconstitutional, I think you can argue the other is. I would say it's part of the general welfare. But be that as it may, it seems to me that you're walking a very, very difficult and tenuous fine line here between saying you support the $700 billion, but you don't support the $15 billion. You support the program, you don't support the way Paulson's doing it. And what's fascinating to me is that Corker himself and the 10 or so Republicans that made the difference, the ones that supported the $700 billion but didn't support the $15 billion, the ones who filibustered this program, made it quite clear that they loved corporate welfare. Well, maybe not they loved it, but they were more than willing to accept it. They'd agreed to the plan. The main thing they wanted is they wanted to hurt unions. They wanted to hurt workers that had already retired, people who'd put in their 30, 40 years and had a pension. They wanted to grab that pension. They wanted to take away their health care. They wanted to punish unions as much as possible and use this opportunity to destroy unions in America. They even had a memo, which I don't know if you've read or not, to put out to the press trying to blame all of this on unions. Now, the argument about corporate welfare is one I respect, all right? We can argue about where it's appropriate, where it's not, but I think it's an argument that has some weight to it, has some merit to it. I've argued against corporate welfare myself. But the argument that we need to hurt workers at a time of, frankly, the largest depression since the Great Depression, take away their health care, take away their pensions, to me, that just seems mean.
Okay, Mark, your enthusiasm impresses me, but let's look at the facts and see where we are. What Corker and his companions were actually arguing for was a provision that would legislate into the law that there would be a date certain at which the labor costs for the Detroit auto companies that are failing, two of the three, GM and Chrysler, I guess Ford's doing okay, there would be a date certain when their labor costs would be competitive with the industry average throughout the United States. They weren't dictating anything. They were just going to, they were saying, can you give us a date certain when the negotiations will create the environment where these costs will be competitive? Now let's give our audience a chance to understand, what the difference in costs are. On average, when you figure out all the labor costs for the big three in Detroit, you're talking about in the $73, $74 an hour range for all the labor costs. And for the non-Detroit three, you're talking about total labor costs in the $32, $33 a range thing. So clearly, one of the reasons, in fact, one of the most significant reasons that Detroit is not competitive is because of their labor contracts. Now, if you can't fix that, why would the Senate Republicans go along with giving them the first $15 billion when if you can't fix one of the major problems, you're not going to get there, and it's going to be $15 billion after $50 billion after $150 billion, and 10 years from now, they're going to be into us for $13 trillion, and there's going to be no end to the cycle.
I got to say, that was a yeoman's effort. You should get an Academy Award for that one, Mike. I mean, it's a great way to take $73 an hour when you know exactly what I know. This isn't for current employees.
No.
This is for
it's total labor costs.
It's
total labor costs.
Retire divided by includes the retirees.
Right, exactly. It includes the retirees. That's total labor costs. Retirees are labor.
Earned their money. They've done it. They've worked for 30, 40 years. They have a pension. Your party wants to take away Social Security. You want to take away the pensions of these people. When you look at current workers, the difference is very tiny. We'll talk more about it. If you want to call in, folks, the toll-free number is 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275. We'll be right back after this.
Around the world, 1 out of every 3 women will be beaten or otherwise abused in their lifetime.
Yeah.
Often by a family member.
You can take a breath.
Or loved one.
No, I wanted to put on
a future free from violence.
Okay. I wonder if people will notice that.
It's all she's ever wished for.
Oh, I need to sit on it. Okay. That's what you're telling me. In the words of the Fonz.
That was a good segment.
Did you know you have the power to stop children from joining gangs? You can help a father find a job and home for his family. You can assist a woman who can't afford the medicine she needs to live and the home she can't live without. You can choose to make a difference in our community. Support Volunteers of America, and you can help improve the lives of nearly 2 million Americans each year with programs and services that help individuals and families overcome their challenges to become as independent as possible. Support the programs that are working in our community. Contact Volunteers of America today. Call 1-800-899-0089.
For some folks, saving for the future is easy, but for you, it might take a little more effort. Saving for your future is your responsibility, and there's a lot to save for.
I never thought of that.
Like your child's education, perhaps uncovered medical expenses, or just to be sure you can live the way you want when you retire. The time is now to save for tomorrow. Save now or work forever. The choice is yours. Choose to save.
Here again, the Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. I'm debating with Republican strategist Mike Lane what the Republican Congress did last Friday. It's an amazing time when I agree with George Bush and Dick Cheney. It's extremely rare, very rare. But they are reasonable compared to what the Republicans did. Let's recall the history of what happened here. The auto companies are in trouble. They're in trouble because of the credit crunch. They're also in trouble because, frankly, they haven't made the best products over the past 20, 30 years. And they're in trouble. They need the money. They need a short-term bridge loan. Congress and the president, the Democrats and the president, were fighting over this bill. And the president said, all right, I'll support a bill to give them the money as long as you take it out of a fuel efficiency fund. Congress had already appropriated some $20 billion to help make these cars more fuel efficient. Bush said, okay, don't take it out of the $700 billion we've given to financial services companies, the TARP, the Troubled Asset Recovery Program. Take it out of money that would go to make cars more fuel efficient, because we all know we don't want cars to be fuel efficient. So that was the deal. Democrats said, fine, we'll do it. We can always replenish the money later. They went in, they came with the deal. They then came to the congressional Republicans, and they said, how do you feel about the bridge loan? And they said, we're just fine with the bridge loan, but you haven't attacked the unions enough. The unions haven't suffered enough. American workers haven't suffered enough. Here we are coming close to a second Great Depression, and American workers, they're living high on the hog. They're doing really well. We need to punish them. Dick Cheney, again, not really someone who's known to be reasonable, said to the Republicans, do you want to be remembered as Herbert Hoover? Not do you want to destroy the economy. He knew they wouldn't care about that. But do you want to be remembered? You're going to lose elections if you do this Herbert Hoover act of punishing workers in the midst of a recession. The Republicans in the Senate are to the right of Dick Cheney. They said, we don't care what you say. We want the country to go to depression because, frankly, then we can all blame it on Obama. We'll even call it the Obama Depression. And we can blame it on the unions. So despite the fact that the difference between union wages and non-union wages for those actually working is about $27.50 an hour and $25 an hour, despite the fact that labor costs are only 10% of the total costs of making a car, despite the fact that the unions actually agreed to the deal when they were pushed hard, but said, we want to do it when our contract ends in 2011, rather than breaking the contract we just signed in 2009, and despite the fact that the great majority of the funds that Bob Corker and the Republicans want to take away do not go to current union workers. They go to people who've already worked in the shop, people who've earned their money, people who can't fight for themselves because they're 65 and 70 and 80 and 90 and worked 40 years in the plant, and they got a pension, and it was part of their deal, and it was part of their contract, and instead of requiring the auto companies to put that money away, knowing the retirees would need it, Bob Corker wants to take these people and punish them. Why? What did they do wrong? Did they cause this crisis? No. Blame the car companies if you want. Blame the credit crunch if you want. It's not these retirees' fault. they're having trouble now. Their earnings are already down. Their 401ks are down. Thank God for Social Security, or these people would be in breadlines. But no, the Republicans are out to attack the American worker. And I am anxious to know how Mike Lane is going to defend that.
Well, Mark, again, your enthusiasm is well. I'm feeling I'll start off every segment by complimenting you on your enthusiasm.
I mean what I say.
It's really good. Let me correct a few things that you misstated. When the union said that they would renegotiate all these things beginning in 2011 because they didn't want to reopen a contract that they had negotiated in 2009, since 2009 is next year, I think you really meant it was
2008.
2008. The fact is, as we talked about during the break, I was including retirement costs in my labor numbers, and you're extrapolating the retirement costs out of the labor numbers, and you are right. The current labor costs differ by about 10-15% in that, but it's still higher in Detroit than it is in the rest of the company in the rest of the country. Now, when you look at the retirement packages that these auto workers get, yes, it's something they negotiated, and yes, it's something the company agreed to pay, and they signed a contract with the union. But when you have something that you simply can't afford to pay, what are you going to do? You can go bankrupt, in which case you can unilaterally abrogate the labor contracts, and you can impose different ones on, and the retiree contracts are labor contracts since they're negotiated with the UAW. Or you can negotiate with the union, and you can say, look, we're not going to make it until next month. You got to give us something back. Now, tell us what you're willing to give, and if you're not willing to give, then the company goes bankrupt and everybody loses. The fact of the matter is, our viewers are probably not shocked to know, it's been widely reported, the health plans that retired auto workers have are better than any health plan you have, or I have, or our crew has, or any government person has. These are, oh, Mark, tell me one person you know that works for a company that has, or is retired from a company that has 100% of the premiums on their health care paid. Only United Auto Workers retired members get that. I don't know anybody else.
Gets that.
Well, you know what? They shouldn't either. And you know what? Auto workers should not be in the same boat as members of Congress, and members of Congress are absolutely taking too much out of it. They're also making huge numbers in terms of the percentage of work that they, or percentage of salary that they retire at. And the third one, as you know, is the sitting around waiting for the job. When you get laid off, if there's no work for you or something like that, you still get 95% of your salary while you're waiting to be called back, which could be in 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years. You're still getting paid 95% of your salary. Tell me anybody else in America other than a UAW member who gets that kind of benefit. I just don't know them. The rest of us settle for $300 a month in unemployment.
Mike, I know you hate unions. Republicans
I don't hate unions.
Republicans hate the American worker. I get that. It's happened for a long time. By the way, speaking of the congressional health care program, Barack Obama's health care plan is precisely to allow any American who wants to opt into that program to opt in. So I'm really looking forward to that.
And their employer is going to pay 100% of the premiums on that? I don't think so. You might get the coverage, but you're not going to get the premium benefit, which is 100%. Mark, all of us pay 25% of our health care if we're employed.
We pay deductibles, but plenty of employers pay premium.
But they pay 75% of premium. They don't pay 100% of premium.
It depends on the employer.
Only the UAW pays 100% of premium.
It depends on the employer, but here's the heart of it. The workers, and again, someone who worked in GM's assembly plant from 1950 to 1990, or I don't know, 1960 to 2000, okay? That worker who joined a union and signed a contract, that worker is not the cause of the current crisis. You cannot blame a guy in his 80s for the reason why we're in a credit crunch, for the reason why American auto companies didn't make fuel-efficient cars like they should have. It's not his fault. I want to know if you would support me in legislation to say that when a company has a pension that it has in a contract, that it actually be forced to fund that pension. Not just say, yeah, we'll give you the money down the line unless we take it back. But when you sign a deal, you should mean the deal. And what GM should have been required to do under the law, I want you to know if you support me, I would require every company that offers a pension to its workers to put that money aside. You can put it in T-bills and something that won't go down when the market goes down. And that can be an annuity so that that people can be paid no matter how long they live. You and I both know how that works. You have a set sum, and then it turns into an annuity so that if someone lives 75 years or someone lives 95 years, we can prepare that in advance. but put the money away. If you sign a contract, these companies should have been of their word, and this should even be on the bargaining table.
Mark.
It's not fair to blame people who've already retired for the current economic crisis.
Mark, as you know, the way it works in the auto industry is the company does not pay the retirement. The UAW, the union, pays the retirement with contributions that they get to the retirement fund from the companies. So it's the union that owes these retired workers the money. It's the union pension fund, not the company. No, it's not
semantics.
It all
comes from the company.
Because it was the union that signed a contract that did not demand that pension fund was fully funded. And if they're willing to do that, why are you blaming the companies when it's the union that signed a contract that promised benefits to retired workers when they didn't have the money in the pension plan to do so?
It's broader than that. It's broader than the question of unions. It's happening all across the country. You have companies that promise things to workers when they have no intention of funding their pensions. Well, it happened in Enron. It happened across the country. I want to know if you would support a law that I would support that says that when you have a contract with a worker and you promise them a pension, at the same time as you give them a check every month or every week for their salary, at the same time, you take another check and you put the $10 or the $20 or whatever it is so that they will have that money when they retire. And that way we won't have this problem where senators like Bob Corker are saying, hey, let's screw over the retirees. Let's take away their health care. They're 85. Okay. They don't need it.
Okay.
Great thing to do around Christmas time, by the way.
The simple answer,
Ebenezer Corker's doing very well.
The simple answer is no. I would not go along with you on that. And let me tell you, let me tell you why. Because we really, well, first of all, let me skip that. We need to be moving away from the way the rest of the world is and the rest of America is. We need to be moving away from a defined benefit plan towards a defined contribution plan. And if we had a
we need to move away from a sure thing into putting money in the stock market.
No, you can invest it any way you want. You can invest it any way you want, but there's no reason why a company should be required, based on economic factors that are totally beyond their control, of whether or not their product is either going to be required or not 20 years from now, et cetera. They will make a promise. I will put X amount of money into your contribution plan. You can direct that investment any way you want to, and that money is yours. I'm with you 100% on that. But in terms,
I want to make sure the money's there.
Well, in a defined contribution plan, it is there. It has to be there. There's no such thing as later funding in a defined contribution plan. It's only in the dinosaur-type defined benefit plans where they can defer that based on actuarial projections as to how much they're going to need to meet their obligations this year. And there's even a program to take care of that. You know, it's the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation that will take care of those things. But in this case, the liability is so massive, who even knows if they have the money?
Look, we have to take a break. I understand what you're trying to do. You're trying to say, Social Security out the window, pensions out the window, give everybody the money, let them put it in the stock market, and if they lose half their wages, let them starve. I understand.
Not what I'm saying.
That's the Republican way.
You can direct the, Mark, but more than 60% of America has a defined contribution retirement plan now.
And that's fine.
Where you define
but
what the employer contributes.
Why is Bob Corker trying to undo an agreement between the unions and the companies, not for corporate welfare reasons, but just to make those retirees suffer? I think Tennesseans are going to be very upset about that. Folks, if you want to call in, if you're upset, if you agree with Mike or with me, give us a call, 888-488-MARK. We'll be right back after this.
Having unprotected sex. Half of the people in the world living with AIDS are women. It doesn't have to be this way. Together, we can change this reality. Let's strive for a world free of violence.
At Volunteers of America, we don't just give kids a way to stay off the streets. We give them the tools they need to reach their full potential. We don't just help the elderly receive needed care. We help them live life to the fullest. We don't just provide food for homeless individuals and families. We provide job training and placement so they can buy groceries. Volunteers of America is a national organization that for over 100 years has provided programs and services that allow people to overcome their challenges to become vital members of their community. At Volunteers of America, we don't just help people, we help people help themselves. Find out how you can support the programs that are working in your community. Contact Volunteers of America today. Call 1-800-899-0089.
Drivers face all kinds of distractions.
Guys, stop playing, no? 127 consecutive.
Before your wireless phone becomes one of them, stop. Drive safely. Keep your phone in easy reach and dial sensibly. In bad weather or traffic, call later and use a hands-free device. Remember, with wireless, safety is your call.
Here again, the Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. If you want to leave a comment on my website, it's at radioinsidescoop.com. In fact, if you leave it during the show, we might just read them on air. My guest today is Mike Lane. He is a Republican strategist, and believe it or not, he's defending what the Republicans did last Friday. Now, let's be clear about what they did and what they didn't do. The Republicans were not complaining about corporate welfare. The Republicans were not complaining about how Hank Paulson has handled the troubled asset recovery program. Frankly, I agree with many of the critiques Mike Lane makes and Barney Frank makes about how Hank Paulson has managed it without enough strings. You gotta have some strings. We're giving hundreds of billions of dollars away. You need to make sure that they're gonna pay it back. So I agree with those critiques. But that wasn't the issue. The issue was how to take down unions. The issue was, and it's such a tiny part of it, 10% of a car, 10% is labor costs. If you have a $30,000 car and you pay no labor costs whatsoever, it's $27,000. It's a tiny portion of it. And what did they want to stop? They wanted to stop 10% of wages, the difference between union and non-union workers. Now, unions work very hard to get that extra benefit for their workers. And so 10% of that, and now on a $30,000 car, we're talking $300. And for the lack of $300, indeed, the unions even agreed to take a haircut. They just said, we'll wait till 2011. We're in a recession now, for God's sake. Our members need the money. Nope, that wasn't enough. The Republicans filibustered the plan. And indeed, a majority voted for it, and in the new Congress, there's more than enough to pass it. So they filibustered it, knowing that it only made the difference between last Friday and January 3rd when the new Congress comes. For those 23 days, Republicans wanted to make a statement. Yeah, we're okay with the Great Depression. Whatever it is, we want to attack unions, and we want to make sure that elderly retirees who've worked very hard all their lives lose their pensions. I don't know what the political gain is of this. Dick Cheney warned it's like Herbert Hoover, but maybe Mike Lane can explain it.
Well, Dick Cheney spent 8 years in office. Maybe it's time for him to go retire and find a new job.
I'm just coming around to my side, Mike. I love that.
He's done a great job for 7.5 years, but he's
done a great job for 7.5 years.
Dick Cheney.
Would you repeat that?
Dick Cheney's done a great job for 7.5 years.
Okay, I wanted to make sure this isn't the April Fool's show.
Dick Cheney does not run some little shadow government as Joe Biden, cynically slammed him for a couple days ago and blah, blah, blah. Dick Cheney has done for 7.5 years what any vice president is asked to do, and that is to support and carry out the policies of the president. This is
I'm sorry.
This is George Bush's bailout.
This isn't the Halloween show, so I'm assuming I'm taking you at face value.
This is George Bush's bailout. This is not Dick Cheney's bailout. Dick Cheney's not the one who said to do it. This is George Bush and a mistaken policy that he thinks this is necessary.
And now he's going to do it. He's going to take it out of the TARP program.
It looks like he will. Announced. It looks like he will.
So now, actually, the Democrats get what they were originally bargaining for, ironically. They were bargaining to get it out of the TARP program rather than out of the fuel efficiency program. Mm-hmm. Bush said, no, 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 no. And then the Republicans came and said, well, can we screw the unions? And apparently now the bridge loan's going to happen, and these massive Republicans in 23 days are going to have no power at all.
Well, they have no power now, but
they do right now. No, obviously they do. They stopped this program.
You know what?
In 23 days, there's a huge difference.
It was the ineffective leadership of Harry Reid that couldn't even get the entire Democratic caucus to be on board with this whole thing.
Mike, you needed 60 votes to stop the filibuster.
And how many did they get?
And they got 52.
And how many Democrats deserted them? 3. All right, so that got them to 55. And then if Harry Reid was a good leader, he could have peeled off 5 more Republicans.
I love you're going to blame Harry Reid.
No,
coming into the new Senate, we're going to have, I think, 59 Democrats, possibly 58. I think 59.
I concur with
Al Franken's going to win in Minnesota.
Al Franken will successfully steal that election.
I think he will win the majority of the votes that are cast and counted.
Norm Coleman is the winner of that election. Al Franken will successfully steal it. We'll debate this one in January.
Well, you can say whatever you want. Obviously, intent of the voters is what matters. my point is that there's a big difference between 59 votes and 51 votes. And had this bill been proposed in the current Congress, I'm sure you won't disagree with me, it would have easily gotten rid of the filibuster, easily become law. You don't disagree on that, do you?
I think it's going to pass quite easily in
January 3rd.
The new year,
right. So here's what I'm trying to understand. Friday was what, the 17th? Got to get my date straight. Something like that.
Close enough.
Close enough. All right. So
no, it couldn't be the 17th. Today's only the 15th.
Today's the 15th. It was the 13th.
13th.
Was it Friday the 13th? Interesting. No, Friday the 12th.
Friday the 12th.
All right. So let me do my math. There were 22 more days of this lame duck Congress in power. 22 days where these Republicans still could filibuster successfully legislation like this. What was the purpose? When they know that come January, this thing is going to pass. What was the purpose of saying to these workers right before Christmas, right before Hanukkah, right before the holidays, we really want to grab your pensions, we want to grab your health care, we want to rip it into shreds, we know it's not your fault, but we need to punish you. Were they channeling Ebenezer Scrooge? Is that what they were doing?
As a matter of fact, Mark, that's actually not what they said. What they said was if we all work together, if you give us a time certain when you can be competitive with the rest of American industry, then we're going to go against our principles and we will go along with this bridge loan and we'll get you into the new administration where you can work your wonders. But unless you work with us and show us in good faith where you can become competitive at some time in the future, the Republicans didn't even prescribe the date. They just said, tell us when you can be competitive with the rest of the industry, then we'll go along with it. And the UAW, the United Auto Workers Union, walked out of the meeting and said, we're not even going to talk about it. That's how the whole thing collapsed.
One, that's not true, and two,
that is how it collapsed. That is how it collapsed.
They basically had a deal.
They wouldn't talk about it.
They had a deal. They had a deal. The creditors were going to take some equity. The unions were going to take a haircut. They were definitely going to take some cuts. In 2011, they didn't want to cut.
But unspecified cuts. They didn't say what cuts they were going to take in 2011. Why not take a cut in 2008, Mark?
Here's what I'm trying to
understand.
Why not
in 2008? Why not tomorrow?
Why not? Because people are suffering, Mike. Because we're in the greatest depression since the Great Depression.
We're talking about
Christmas is around the corner, and there are people that don't have the money to buy toys for their kids.
We're talking
and you're trying to punish 1% of the cost of a car at best is what you're talking about. It has to all fall on the backs of American workers.
You're again limiting yourself only to current wages. You can't divorce current wages from retiree obligations. That is a huge piece of the cost of a car. In fact, retiree health care, not even pensions, just retiree health care accounts for $2,000 of every car that comes off the assembly line in Detroit. It's $2,000. It's amazing. You know, let's just cut it down to maybe $1,200. Let's see what we can do.
Why are Republicans determined to take away the health care of 80-year-old people who've worked their whole lives, played by the rules, done everything right, and abided by their contract? Why do we want to hurt these people? Please explain this.
Two things, Mark. Number one, tell me why, if a union on behalf of their employees or on behalf of their workers and an employer, a poorly run auto company in Detroit, enter into an agreement that everybody knows they can't keep, why does it become my wallet's, my tax dollars' responsibility to bail them out of stupid decisions that they've made? I just don't understand why I'm expected to do that.
Look, why shouldn't the management pay the bill? The management
should pay.
Made the bad decisions. They were the ones who decided to build the cars that weren't fuel efficient. They were the ones who decided to build the Hummers rather than the hybrids. It's their fault. At least the first time they came around their corporate jets. Now they're finally learning it doesn't look good, so they're driving in their own cars.
You know what I would do?
But it seems to me that in a land of golden parachutes, in a land where you have management making, I forget, was it 400 times what the average worker makes in Japan? And remember, Corker wants to make sure that Japan controls our auto market. He wants to make sure that Japan, which by the way, gives health care benefits to its own people in Japan. They have unions in Japan. They just want to treat us like we're, I don't know.
There's nothing Japanese about like Nissan USA and Volkswagen USA and Toyota USA. Those are American companies.
What Japan is doing, it's fascinating, is in their own country they pay health care for workers.
Yes,
in their own country they pay pensions for workers. With us, it's kind of like, it reminds me of when American companies would, go down to, to Guatemala and have peasants make Nike shoes for 10 cents an hour, or Thailand. Japan's treating us like that now. They're our overlords, and they're saying, we'll give our workers health care, but not American workers. We can get cheap labor down in Tennessee and Alabama, and we even know that there are Tennessee and Alabama senators in the Republican Party that'll support us for doing that. Shouldn't the people who made the mistake, namely the management of these companies, shouldn't they pay the piper? Shouldn't they resign rather than always putting it on the backs of workers when it's not their fault to begin with?
Here's what I would do if I was the head of the United Auto Workers Union. I would sit down and say, okay, clearly I've got to give some back because the big dollars are right here. But I would sit down with management and I would say, okay, we're willing to pay 20% of our health care costs. We're willing to give back 10% of our retirement. We're willing to kick in the things that are going to make this company really go. But in return, we want A, B, C, D, and E, and all those things. But you know what? When we get to Z, we don't want a single management employee making more than $500,000 in this company. This $50 million paycheck that you're getting,
fine by me.
But the union should negotiate that. That's the way you do it. And then you say, and oh, by the way, anybody making anybody over $500,000 takes a cut down to $500,000. And anybody who's making between $100,000 and $500,000, they get, if the union takes a 10% pay cut, those management people get a 30% pay cut. That would work perfectly. I see no problem with that at all. And those are the terms and conditions under which the union would agree to take their cuts, save the company. Everybody wins, and my wallet is secure because the taxpayers are not getting dinged to bail out a company that's going to fail anyway.
Mike, we're starting to agree again, and that really scares me.
But
so I'm going to have to listen very closely to your proposal because it sounds reasonable. So something's wrong here.
The unions have to negotiate this.
It seems to me the proper people to negotiate this are the shareholders of the company. You want to know who's really getting dinged? The investors. There used to be a time in America, in fact, it's still taught in corporate law classes in 101, not 102.
Okay.
In corporate law classes, they teach you in 101 that the shareholders own the corporation. And then you learn in 102 and 103 and 104 that that's more myth than fact. It's technically true, but in reality, shareholders have no control, virtually no control over the corporation. They have elections a lot like Saddam Hussein did. Only one candidate runs. And in fact, they're not even allowed to put up an alternative candidate without paying from their own pockets. If we had corporations that truly looked out for the interests of their shareholders, management wouldn't be making $50, $100, $200 million a year. My ex-boss, Congressman Barney Frank, the same person you wouldn't watch on 60 Minutes.
Same guy who caused this whole thing in the first place.
He didn't cause any of this. Has proposed a bill for at least 6 years now. It's probably known Barney for more than a decade now. Here's the bill. The bill would it's only voluntary. Frankly, I would make it required. But his bill is only voluntary to allow shareholders to take a vote on whether or not they would prefer an alternative to the current management. And this bill to allow shareholders to make a voluntary poll on whether they like the current management enough has been prevented by Republican Congress after Republican Congress. If shareholders truly own their corporation, shouldn't they be able to kick the management out?
You know what, Mark? I see no particular value in that. Shareholders can buy or not buy stock depending on what they want to do. If they don't want to buy stock where they feel they're being underrepresented or malrepresented or anything like that, they don't have to buy the stock.
That's true in all corporations. They have no choice.
Right.
They can choose between this bad corporation or that corporation. They're all Delaware corporations. Delaware goes to the bottom of the barrel. That's not Joe Biden's fault, but it is his state. And if we had laws that required corporations to be more responsive to their shareholders, we wouldn't have had a lot of this mess, frankly.
And Joe Biden will defend Delaware to the end because it's what makes Delaware economically successful. Let me give you one more idea.
And it's a mistake, and I will condemn it.
Let me give you one more idea very briefly.
Really quick, because we got 50 seconds.
All right. We all hear, if you're local here in Northern Virginia, we all hear on the air these commercials from Joseph A. Bank, a local retailer, saying 70% off on our mix, blah, blah, blah. Why doesn't Detroit just have a fire sale and sell everything at 70% off? It would solve their excess inventory problem. It would solve their cash flow problem. They'd get all the money in that would keep them going until the new Congress came. Instead of getting this bailout, if I could get a $40,000 car for $12,000, you know what, Mark? I'd go buy it. Let's have a 70% off sale the way everybody else does.
They're already losing money on every car. This way they'll lose more money on every car. They need to restructure.
They're losing it by having it sit on the lot. They're not losing it by selling it.
Well, when they sell each car, they're not making a profit. The way to make a profit is to do what Japan and Europe have done. Go to cheaper, higher fuel efficiency cars. I know we have a caller. We will get to you and your calls. 888-488-MARK right after this.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Wanted some matches and that's no good. Yeah. Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Fire. 'Cause there's nothing there only about $3. just force. It's what you desire. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Yeah.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Why don't you just wash your car at home?
When I wash my car, everything runs down the street and down into the storm drains. With all the chemicals in the soaps and waxes, the last thing I want to do is poison my own drinking water. At least here, it's all contained and recycled on site. That's why I also take my car in for oil changes instead of doing it myself. I might take a chance on spilling stuff. You know what the best part is?
What?
More time to kick back and watch the game.
How far would you go to protect the planet?
I want you to build an ark.
Here we go. Okay, that's good. Oh, okay. Ow!
Maybe there's another way.
People, the flood is imminent!
Is it too much to ask for a little precipitation?
Go to fightglobalwarming.com to find out what you and your community can do to reduce global warming pollution.
Somewhere around the world, there are men and women of the armed forces risking their lives, helping rebuild communities after natural disasters, collecting toys for needy children, tutoring kids in school.
George, is it ready?
These are your sons and daughters who work to keep us safe, secure, and free. Dedicated men and women who put their country first.
Here again, the Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. We're discussing what happened last Friday when the Republicans said to the elderly retirees of auto companies, screw you, you worked hard for a living, you played by the rules, I guess you have to die now without health care. Why can't we simply expect people to keep their bargains? It's not their fault. I know we have a caller on the line. We'll get to him in just a second. Before we do, I just want to show you my website, radioinsidescoop.com. I have an article here called Lame Duck Congressional Republicans Use Final Grasp on Power to Strangle the American Worker. If we're going down, we'll take American workers with us, Senator Corker of Tennessee cried. Workers must die so that those of the nobler class who inherited their wealth may have more yachts, screamed Republican Majority Leader Mitch McConnell as Capitol Police attempted to pry McConnell's death grip from the necks of those benighted, wretched souls who dared to attempt to work for a living rather than making money the Republican way, by marrying a beer heiress. Okay, I took a few liberties in writing this. I admit that. When I said that the Republican beast in its dying breath, slain but not yet dead, forged its last economic suicide attack to terrorize its greatest enemy, the American worker, I may have overstated it a little bit, but not much. At the end of the day, Republicans don't want to tax inherited wealth. They don't want to tax very much dividends and capital gains. They don't really want to harm the people that don't work for a living, that just sit there and clip coupons and earn interest. They really want to harm people who've worked their entire lives in an auto plant and are now trying to retire with health care. What's the difference?
All things being equal, let me say it's just as easy to marry an heiress as it is not to marry an heiress. So I think everybody aspires to that, Mark. However, let me, on a more serious note, yes, I'm glad that you admitted that your diatribe there is fiction, not even particularly good fiction or compelling fiction.
I thought it was good. But, I wouldn't say fiction. I would just say a bit of an exaggeration.
Over the top, I think, is the word that comes to mind.
Just a little bit. Just a little bit over the top.
Let's see what George has to say.
George from Fairfax, welcome to the Inside Scoop.
Well, thank you for taking my call. It seems a little strange that AIG gets a $150 billion bailout. And I call him Don Paulsoni because it's got to be mafia. How he can say, well, we want to encourage the bank. And Congress is just as much the problem. If they cannot regulate where that money's going, and we've been comparing regulation and deregulation. Let's face it, we regulate speeding. We regulate where people park. We regulate murder. Serious consequences to that one. And yet they want to deregulate money. The whole investment world, Wall Street, and sell that even to school kids and call that investing. It seems like you have a fundamental dysfunctional problem here if you're talking about Wall Street as being investing.
Well, George, I think you make a good point. I mean, Wall Street, to me, made even worse mistakes than the cars. The cars, yes, they should have made the hybrids rather than the Humvees. I've complained about that before. I'm not going to defend a lot of their business practices. But Wall Street was just gambling. They were just gambling. They were just betting a bunch of money on that mortgage prices would always go up and they lost their gamble, and now we have to bail them out to the tune of 50 times what this little bridge loan for the car companies here. I mean, doesn't George have a point? Why are we paying AIG $80 billion? Did you support that?
George, thank you for your call. And you and I have had occasion to discuss these things before. And I hope I surprise you by telling you that I think you've got an extraordinarily valid point tonight. And I am going to agree with a lot of what you said. If I was Hank Paulson and I was in charge of the Treasury, first of all, let me say, I hated it, but I understood the concept of preserving markets. I did not at all understand the concept of preserving companies. Now, when they bailed out AIG, I did not support that because they did not make the case to my satisfaction that the entire financial markets were going to collapse if AIG went down. However, that was their argument, that AIG was so big that it would take everything down with it. It was going to be the end of everything. We get into this death spiral, etc. They didn't sell me, but they sold enough people to do it. However, when you give the money to AIG, it has to have some strings attached, and I've already gone through some of those strings. The first is nobody in the company makes more than $500,000. The second thing is anybody making between $100,000 and $500,000 takes an immediate 1/3 pay cut. Are you telling me that if you're making $500,000 that you can't survive on $367,000? Well, if you got to sell your boat, sell your boat. I don't care.
And no more fancy corporate retreats. You're sounding like an economic populist.
No, absolutely.
I've converted Mike, George. See,
no, absolutely.
He understands.
Absolutely. I mean, I have no problem with these, $1,000 a night corporate retreats place, if that's what they give their top salespeople and stuff like that. But you don't do it in the same breath as when you're begging for an $80 billion bailout from the government. Sorry, but your top salesmen are going to have to settle for the Holiday Inn. They're not going to go to a $1,000 a night resort retreat. You're not going to have corporate retreats where you plan your escape. You have a boardroom in your building. That's where you have your corporate retreat.
Again, Mike, you're sounding reasonable to me again, so I'm going to have to listen more closely. George, what do you have to say? You still there? Nope. Maybe George is gone.
All right.
Okay. Let me move on to another topic, though. We got a few minutes left. In his last few days in office, George Bush is doing something that's becoming frequent among presidents. He's getting a lot of regulations out. Now, again, I could say this for any president. If it was worthwhile doing in the last 30 days in office, you should have done it in the 8 years you had to do it before. One of the most interesting things that George Bush wants to do, though, is he's using regulations to gut the Endangered Species Act. What he's doing basically is saying that if a government agency feels that a species won't be endangered, if, let's say, the Energy Department thinks that polar bears won't be harmed by going and having oil spills throughout the Arctic and global warming and so forth, then they don't have to contact the scientists. They can just ignore the scientists. Now, that is not the current state of the law. The current state of the law and regulations is if you think something is going to have an impact, you go and you check with the scientists, the neutral scientists, and they let you know what the impact will be on the endangered species. Why is it that George Bush is modifying these regulations to make sure that we don't get scientific fact? I mean, I know George Bush hates science. I'm sure he hates polar bears and wants to see them go away. But other than just a pure sop to the oil industries, why is it that he's gutting the law 30 days before he leaves office?
All right. The first thing is, no one's trying to hurt any polar bears, Mark. You know that this has nothing to do with the Arctic or anything like that.
Oh, but it does.
No, it actually doesn't. What this is going to do is this is going to create an opportunity to streamline the construction of major projects done by executive agencies of the government, like the Department of Energy or the Department of Transportation or something like that, or from states that are trying to build new roads or stuff like that. We're not talking about polar bears. We're talking about snail darters. We're talking about brown squirrels. We're talking about that kind of stuff. You know, when you're trying to get something accomplished, which is on behalf of the American people, and you're trying to get them out of traffic gridlock, why do you want to give the enviro wackos the chance to hold them up in court? Why do you want to give allegedly impartial but really ideological bent kinds of National Academy of Sciences and that kind of stuff, the chance to hold these projects up for 10, 15, 20 years so that the American people can't get the benefit of them? The answer is you issue a regulation that if the department in its best judgment concludes that it's not going to have a negative impact, then it can go ahead without getting involved in this 10, 15, 20-year approval process. You know what? If I was Senator President-elect Obama, I'd love this. It means my people can now get things done. I've got them in there making decision, no problem. This is a Christmas gift to the incoming Obama administration. They ought to embrace it and love it.
Maybe we could show this on the screen because it very much is.
It's not about polar bears. It's about snail darters.
Why
it's
does
about brown
Dirk
foxes.
Kemp Thorpe hate polar bears? Look, what he said was the main reason, and this is the Secretary of the Interior. This isn't Mark Levine. This isn't Mike Lane talking here. What he said was the purpose of this was that scientists were saying that a lot of our energy production causes global warming, and global warming endangers species like the polar bear, because they don't have the Arctic ice, they can't hunt seals. This is well known. This is pretty much scientific fact. And well, it's not pretty much, it is scientific fact, actually. It's what the generally considered...
And you got this from Al Junk Science Gore, right?
No,
yes.
I got this from our own
Junk Science Gore.
Government scientists, not from Al Gore, from the National Academy of Science, people who are hired by our government based on being the top scholars in the field.
People with an axe to grind.
Why is it that the best people in the field, the best scientists in the field, I guess you want someone that went to Liberty Law School, that went to Jerry Falwell's law school? Oh, polar bears are created by God every day. They will never go extinct. Why is it that the Bush administration, for the last 8 years, hates science? We know the answer. Secretary Kemp Thorpe tells us polar bears are in the way. They're in the way of oil production. And people are saying that just because polar bears are endangered and just because we're not going to cease existing, that we should stop getting, a few months of oil out of Alaska. This is about polar bears. This is about oil. And the law is the law. And I actually have a lot of confidence that Obama and the Democratic Congress is going to do everything they can to do to reverse this polar bear regulation.
Polar bears may be 1-2% of this or something like that. But Obama doesn't need to do anything about it. It's his people that are going to be making the decisions. All he needs to do is appoint the people to the positions in his administration that will make decisions consistent with his philosophy, and there's absolutely zero problem with this at all.
And I'm confident he'll do that. So tell me why.
Well, then why is he going to obsess about it?
Tell me why Bush, you're right, it's not just polar bears. They're allowing more strip mining of coal. They're allowing more dirty water. In our national parks, they're going to allow more polluted air and water in our national parks. Why is it? If
this has nothing to do with water. No, this is environmental endangered species. But it has nothing to do with water and
this particular regulation doesn't. But George Bush, in his last 20 days, in his last 50 days, is doing all kinds of regulations that do exactly that do allow more pollutants in our water. And the only thing I can think is he's trying to destroy what's left of our environment before he goes. I do think, though, that you're right, that Obama and the Democratic Congress is going to undo as much of this as possible. Unfortunately, they'll probably be focused on the economy first and then get to it.
They don't have to undo it. It's there for them to use or not to use. They don't have to undo anything. It's
do.
a gift to the Obama administration.
They do, because he actually removed restrictions on polluters. He's going to have to undo all these regulations. I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Mike Lane, I always appreciate arguing with you. Today you made a little sense on a few points. I'm going to have to go over it really carefully to find out where I've gone wrong here. But I hope you've enjoyed the show. I hope you have a very happy holidays, whatever holiday you celebrate. Christmas, Hanukkah, New Year's, Kwanzaa, whatever it is. We want to wish you happy holidays to the entire Inside Scoop family. And we'll be back in 2 weeks for a special holiday show. This is Mark.